pues buenos días a todos. Antes de empezar, algunas palabras.
Good morning, everyone. Just before we start, we'll talk about some procedural aspects. This meeting has simultaneous interpretation, and on the bottom part, you'll be able to choose English or Spanish, and thus any of you can speak in whatever language you want.
In the buttons below, you can choose either English, Spanish, or just listen both languages. El otro tema importante es que
the other important issue is that this will also be streamed.
In this meeting in the room with Zoom, there will be more people listen this conversation. Decía que además de la gente que está en el Zoom, habrá más gente que nos siga por web streaming, por mayor participación. Empezaríamos entonces la reunión. Como ustedes saben, esto es una reunión preparatoria.
So we will begin this meeting. This is a pre-COP meeting of the second meeting of the Conference of the Parties. It's an extraordinary meeting that will be held between the 19th and 21st of April in Argentina, and this session enables us to be ready for that meeting. I would like to offer the floor to Dr. Marcelo Cousillos for his opening remarks of this meeting. He is the president of the Conference of the Parties and represents Uruguay. Marcelo, you have the floor. Thank you, Carlos. We thank the Secretariat for the organization of this meeting. May you all have a very good morning. May you all be very welcome to this first pre-COP meeting. I would like to especially greet the representatives of all the different state parties, the signatory states that are present, observers, and also especially the representatives of the public and the candidates of the committee to support the application and compliance of the Escazú Agreement, and all those that accompany us today. As mentioned by Carlos, my name is Marcelo Cousillas. I am from Uruguay, and I represent on behalf of my country the chair of the presiding officers. I am the director of the legal division of the Ministry of the Environment of Uruguay, and I'm honored to preside at this PrEP COP2 meeting of the Escazú Agreement on access to information, participation, and access to justice in environmental issues in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean. That will be held in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, between the 19th and 21st of April of this year. As you know, today's meeting seeks to continue to talk about the discussions that will be held during the COP2, and its main objective will be to choose the first members of the committee to support the implementation and compliance of the agreement. And thus, this will be the moment to get to better know the 10 candidates included in the list, in the proposed roster of candidates that we have prepared as from the presiding officers. As you can see in the program, following the welcoming remarks, we will be holding a dialogue with those candidates. Subsequently, there will be a moment to present the organization of work of the COP2 meeting and deal with other matters. So before offering the floor to my colleague from Argentina and the Secretariat, I would like to congratulate everyone. I would like to congratulate you all, albeit a few days late, because last 4th of March, we commemorated 5 years since the adoption of the Escazú Agreement. 5 years ago, we were in Costa Rica, in that beautiful country, deliberating and concluding years of negotiation that gave rise to the agreement that we have called, in accordance with the place where we were at that time, the Escazú Agreement. Now, all this makes us tremendously proud and undoubtedly is something that is worth celebrating. We are at a key moment when it comes to the implementation of this agreement, following the first conference of the parties that lay the foundations for the operation of the agreement. We are now on the way to establishing one of its key elements that was specifically stipulated in the body of the agreement. And hopefully then this meeting will be so successful that we will be very well prepared for the consensus of the COP2 meeting. Thank you, Marcelo. Now I would like to offer the floor to Cecilia Nicolini, who is the Secretary of Climate Change, Sustainable Development and Innovation of the Argentinian Republic, and also Vice Chair of the Presiding Officers in Argentina, will be our host during this second conference of the parties. So, uh, Cecilia, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Uh, the pre-COP is upcoming. I would like to greet my dear colleague Marcelo from Uruguay and all the representatives of the Secretariat, Carlos, and the whole team that has worked and entered into an endless dialogue during the past few months. And I would like to greet all my colleagues from Latin America and the Caribbean that accompany us today, and especially the candidates to become members of the committee to support the implementation and compliance of our dear Escazú. This morning, we were thinking that it has been a year now since we entered into a commitment in Chile with the idea of meeting this year in this COP2 meeting in Argentina in order to support the implementation of this agreement, which is so important for our countries. And meeting again, and during this preparatory meeting, a month away from the COP implies that we're very enthusiastic and very proud of the work that we have done, and so that the commitments that we have entered into may bear fruit. I believe that we are at a very important and critical moment. In our case, Argentinians are suffering from the impact of drought that impacts more than half of our territory. This week, precisely, we thought that the weather was going to change, but we still continue to suffer from a heat wave that impacts our health, that has impacted access to energy, as occurred last week. And as many of you have said, it is very difficult to call these waves because, unfortunately, these waves are becoming the new normality. We have also seen with great concern how Chileans on the other side of the Andes continue to suffer wildfires, and in our country with special violence in the area of El Bolsón. And of course, we suffered from hurricanes last year, devastating hurricanes in the Caribbean islands, and all the changes and needs that we have to work on very quickly in the Amazon, in this lung for our planet, so that deforestation doesn't continue to make headway. And now we hope that Brazil will also join this agreement because it represents a tremendous opportunity for our region. Well, this is the context, and I believe that we're very clear on the fact that an agreement such as the Escazú Agreement provides our peoples and all of us with the tools so that we may become part of environmental decision making. I also believe that it is extremely important to mention that Argentina this year is celebrating 40 years of democracy, 40 years of being able to elect our representatives, 40 years of sovereignty residing on the people. And when we speak about this instrument, which is the Escazú Agreement, it is far more than a legal instrument, but we view this as a human rights treaty. And if we conceive it in this fashion, and during this very important year for Argentina, well, that implies that we face a challenge of making principles um, being a reality throughout our government. in all government decisions and at all levels. And that's who we are collaboratively building a plan based on a national diagnosis or on a provincial diagnosis. And that as a result of this diagnosis, we are able to detect improvement priorities. And we have also conducted a citizens consultation. We have made headway with internal coordination, governance, early participation, and so on. Many challenges that are important when it comes to the implementation of this agreement. I would also like to say that we have included environmental decision-making as one of the commitments of the 5th National Action Plan of the Open Government, which is coordinated by a different ministry, but we are coordinated with all spheres of government so that we can indeed work around our plan and also define among different stakeholders the concept of early participation. And to conclude, because I believe that we have a very interesting day ahead, and obviously the most important people are the candidates. I would like to say that COP is an opportunity in order to point towards these national efforts, but above all, and I like to conceive it this way, that this means that we're betting on regional on the region, so the region can play an active role faced with this planetary crisis. And making headway with the implementation of this agreement means that the region will be at the vanguard of environmental issues, and we add more countries to the vision and the implementation. And I believe that this is a tremendous opportunity for us all. So we begin the countdown, looking at COP2 in Buenos Aires, and we hope to be able to work together with all of you so that this commitment may truly become a transformative action for all our peoples. Thank you very much. And we will continue with this pre-COP and get to know all the different candidates.
Daría ahora la palabra a
Thank
Irene
you,
Murillo.
Cecilia. I'd like to offer the floor to Irene Murillo. She's the elected representative of the audience. Go ahead, Irene. Thank you, Carlos. And good morning, everyone. Those of you who are with us today, and on behalf of the audience of the public, I'd like to welcome all of you and especially greet the representatives of the parties and the signatories, the representatives that are present, and the observer countries that are also represented, with a special focus on people who belong to the public organizations that have written to us and that are listening to us through these platforms. I think we have reached a point in this process which is key to develop the institutional arrangement of this agreement. And as of COP, we will start building the committee to support the application and implementation and compliance of the agreement. And the idea today is to hold this dialogue with the 10 people that were left in that list out of the 48 excellent candidacies that were received with representation from the entire region. For the audiences, for the public's representatives, this is a very important step in consolidating the institutional nature of this agreement. And as part of the cooperation spirit and capacity building spirit of Escazú, the committee to support application and compliance will be key. It is an opportunity for us to, at the same time, to express that the expert nature and independent individuals represented by these candidates is absolutely key from the representation of organizations that represent the audience or the public. The chance of discussing with these 10 candidates affords us the chance of prepare the COP meeting in Argentina. So
pues es de mucho gusto para nosotros.
So it is a pleasure for us to be present here.
El mantenimiento y la consolidación de los espacios de participación.
The consolidation of engagement space for the public is a feature, typical feature of this agreement that is there to make history and allowed us to continue to innovate as this Escazú process has been from the very beginning. I wish all success to everyone, especially the candidates that we're going to hold this dialogue with. Thank you for being present.
Muchas gracias, Irene. Como parte de la Secretaría, solo quisiera
Thank you, Irene. As part of the Secretariat, I would like to just deliver two messages. As Marcelo said first, 5 years ago, the agreement was being adopted, but that doesn't mean that the process wasn't alive, and we've been working a lot on it. It's not only 13 parties and more countries that are joining it soon. But during this period, we held 2 meetings with the signatory countries with that regional integration spirit, as Cecilia said, so that more countries can join us. We held that first COP that meant 6 important decisions that were adopted, not only the COP rules and the compliance committee, but there was also a decision made regarding environmental affairs advocates that created a regional forum that we organized in Quito last year, the first one, and this year, the second one will take place. A task force was created, led by Chile, Ecuador, St. Kitts and Nevis. I'd like to recognize St. Lucia, Mexico, and Antigua and Barbuda, some other members of that same panel. We renewed the elected public representatives, and as Irene said, and those who preceded me, we chose the members of the compliance committee, which is the entity that has been appointed to perform that job. Also, the Principle 10 Observatory and the regional public mechanism still acts as an integration platform for all stakeholders in the process, including a participatory platform. So I believe in these 5 years, we've done a lot. Obviously, there are important urgencies in the region because of environmental issues and some elements related to meeting the rule of law standards and human rights. But the Escazú Agreement is a tool that is being built. And so for ICLAC, it's an honor to be supporting this intergovernmental process and participatory process as well, and of all people in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is how we're going to keep on working. But with these opening remarks, I'd like to close this first segment to go into the second segment in our agenda, which is precisely the discussion with the candidates, the elected nominated members to the committee to support implementation and compliance. I'd like to offer the floor to guide the first discussions and introductory remarks that will explain the process to Mr. Marcelo Causillas as chair of the Thank you, Carlos. In fact, I think we can go to the next one that shows the agenda. Yes, precisely. As Carlos just said, the idea now would be to remind us all some elements and to communicate to you how we get to this numbered list of candidates or nominations for this committee. I think it would be worthwhile reminding each one very briefly that the committee, according to Article 18.1 of this agreement that is entitled as Committee to Support Implementation and Compliance. It's an entity in the Conference of the Parties that is there to promote the application and to support the parties in implementing this agreement. Its rules of operation were approved in the Conference of the Parties in its first edition, its first meeting, through decision 1-3. Such rules establish that such committee will be made up of 7 members that will exercise their functions as individuals. So the members of the committee will have to have the moral integrity, recognizable competency, and rights of access or other matters considered in the agreement. There will have to be nationals or residents of the countries in the region that is contained in Annex number 1 of the agreement, and they will have to be independent of the powers of state, both executive and legislative and judiciary powers. In choosing these members of the committee, some elements were considered, especially elements were considered, but I believe are significant. A equitable geographic distribution, considering the different sub-regions that make up our whole region. Secondly, gender parity. Third, the experience and judicial and legal knowledge and expertise. Now, remembering the rules themselves, there cannot be more than 1 member that comes from the same nationality. That is to say, the committee can only have 1 member according to or from each state in the region. Now, in order to get to this numbered list of potential members, we had to resort to a procedure that, as you may know, any individual that meets the criteria was able to be a candidate, could apply to become part of the committee. That's why the leadership group created 10 candidacies for the consideration of the conference, inviting the individuals, representatives of the audience, to be part of a meeting in which they were asked about the list before its preparation for to be considered by the Conference of the Parties. From that numbered list, the Conference of the Parties will choose the members of the committee by consensus. That it's only 7. If consensus may not be reached, the Conference of the Parties will have to choose them by a simple majority according to the votes, but in this case, in a secret vote. These 3 basic steps to reach the election, of course, have to go through a more detailed process. In order to start it, the Secretariat published on September 15th last year the basis for the submittal of these candidacies, providing a time window of 3 months ending on December 2022 for the application. As a result of that, and 49 candidates submitted their proposals coming from 15 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Out of these 49 candidacies, 48 nominations were 48 were admitted, and 1 of them was not admitted because being outside the deadline. All these nominations were published on January 2023 at the Escazú Agreement's website. So we have all had a full knowledge of all the nominations. In order to facilitate the review, the chair requested the Secretariat to come up with a sheet with the nominations, with a number of fields that are somehow presented on this slide. nationality, residence, gender, age, compliance with independence criteria, expertise, current position, competency on access rights, academic accolades and degrees, etc. You can read it on the screen. The chairmanship reviewed the sheet prepared by the Secretariat. So we could make sure that the requirements were met and being able to appraise the background information. Additional criteria were having legal expertise, how many years of experience, relevant experience the candidates had, among others. Special care was devoted to the geographic distribution, equitable geographic distribution and gender parity, as I mentioned before. And from the slide itself, you can see here the numbers and percentages of the corresponding nominations.
La lista numerada
This numbered list was prepared, this roster was prepared after that review, since the chairmanship invited the audience representatives to a meeting and they were asked about this list, about this roster before their submittal. This roster of candidates is part of the LC-COP document EZ.2-DDR-1 dated on February 23rd, 2023, that is available on the conference website. The same one was published 8 weeks prior to the dates set for the conference of the parties, according to the procedural rules, and they were distributed to the parties, to the elected representatives of the audience, and it was made part of the regional public mechanism.
As a result of this process, the roster is comprised of 5 men and 5 women from 10 different nationalities and countries of Annex 1 of the agreement. There are 3 representatives from Central America, Mexico, 3 representatives from the English-speaking Caribbean, and 4 from South America. In the roster, they represent, we have 5 state parties and 5 non-state parties. The numbers for this, for the production of the roster represents the alphabetical order, taking into consideration the surname of each one of the candidates. In Annex 2, we find the roster that we can now present, and based on what we have said, is in
de Chile, en el 2 Mariana Blengio Valdés de Uruguay, en el 3 Rubens Born de Brasil, en el 4 Juan Carlos Carrillo de México, en el 5 Rita Joseph Olivetti de Granada, en el 6 Patricia Madrigal Cordero de Costa Rica, en el 7 Gaber Mitchell de Trinidad Tobago, en el 8 Andrés Napoli de Argentina, en el 9 Carol Stephens de Jamaica y en el 10 Félix Wynn de Panamá. A todos ellos me complace darles la bienvenida a esta preconferencia, a esta pre-COP, y les agradecemos mucho su presencia y su disponibilidad para que puedan hacer su presentación, puedan hacerse conocidos ante los estados parte y los demás participantes de esta reunión y podamos entonces tener criterios para su selección. Carlos.
Muchísimas gracias, Marcelo. Voy a parar la presentación. Como bien ha dicho la presidencia. Esta es una lista numerada por orden alfabético del primer apellido, es decir, no tiene prelación por orden en el que son elegidos los candidatos, pero obviamente ese orden nos va a permitir ordenar también las intervenciones de los candidatos y vamos a seguirlas en el mismo orden que están en el listado. La presidencia junto a la secretaría y con algunas consultas a las vicepresidencias y a la mesa y a los representantes electos del público sugirió que los candidatos dedicasen 3 minutos a presentarse como ellos quisieran y después otros 7 minutos seguidos a continuación para responder a un par de preguntas importantes. Y era cómo los candidatos cumplen con los requisitos básicos para ser miembros del comité, es decir, integridad moral, reconocida competencia en derechos de acceso, independencia de los poderes ejecutivo, legislativo y judicial de los países del anexo 1 y además por qué entienden ellos que deben ser elegidos como integrantes del comité, considerando, entre otras cuestiones, como cuáles serían sus mayores contribuciones a las funciones del comité y de qué manera enfocarían su trabajo en este primer periodo, dado que van a ser
during this for this committee, and we will have to develop ways to work with this. To begin with the interventions that will be heard in the same order as they were nominated. I would like to say that you have exactly 10 minutes for each intervention, 3 plus 7. And after 9 minutes, I will interrupt you and let you know that you have 1 minute left. So without further ado, this would certainly be the mechanism. And to begin with, I would like to offer the floor to the first candidate that has been nominated in alphabetical order. And first of all, Dr. Guillermo Acuña from Chile. And Guillermo, you now have the floor for 10 minutes as from now. Thank you very much, Carlos. Good morning, everyone. We thank the representatives of the chair for their opening remarks, the representative of the public. Likewise, I would like to greet all the other candidates that who share the honor of being in this position, and I wish everyone the biggest success. And we'll see how we fare with this issue. Given the fact that we have a short period of time, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Guillermo Acuña. I am Chilean, a lawyer, and I have postgraduate studies in environmental and economic development in 1994 and of environmental law and its prospects in 1996. I have 34 years experience in working with environmental issues and sustainable development as from an institutional and legal viewpoint, and all those aspects are related to the work of the committee. As from the 31st of December 2022, I left ECLAC after fruitful work there for 28 years in order to participate in a subsidiary entity, which is the COP of the Escazú Agreement, which is the committee for the implementation and compliance of the agreement. And so it would be a great honor for me to work there. And I would like to contribute to the more than 3 decades of experience that I have in terms of environmental law and law related to access rights. I formed part of the initial team that, as from day one, put forward the possibility of working around the issue of access rights, Principle 10 in ECLAC, and with countries in the region. I feel very proud because part of that work that dates back 20 years today crystallized in what we're doing now, a legally binding agreement with an entity that has been established, a conference of the parties, its regulations, the way in which it works, its supporting guidelines, and so on. And soon, this committee. When we talk about moral integrity, well, I feel somewhat uncomfortable with that because this makes me a little bit uncomfortable, but given the fact that that is a requirement on the part of countries in the chair, and therefore I would like to declare that I feel that I have a full moral integrity when it comes to forming part of this committee, the supporting committee. And of course, I will deliver the solemn statement that is requested in numeral 2. No, sorry, in point 2 of the procedural regulations, numeral number 7. Now, with regards renowned competency, well, again, it seems strange to speak in that fashion, at least for me. I feel a little bit uncomfortable with that, but I feel that I'm competent based on these more than 30 years experience. And competency is associated to experience, to having had these experiences. My candidacy deals with those issues, and I hope that you have had the opportunity of reading this. I have legal knowledge, environmental law, knowledge of access laws, knowledge of the treaties of the Escazú Agreement, of its negotiation that I form part of its spirit, and of maintaining alive this relationship between countries interested in these issues, and the work of ECLAC for 10 or 12 years until the Rio Declaration in 2012 became a reality. I would also like to highlight that I have experience in working with intergovernmental entities, with the General Assembly of the UN in the intergovernmental system of ECLAC, its commission, its plenary commission, subsidiary committees, entities of ECLAC, which I believe contributes a different experience to this committee. I form part of the team that established in the work plan upon the request of countries in the period of sessions in Brasilia, Principle 10, and the declaration and the Rio Declaration as a specific working point, and that enabled ECLAC to continue along these lines for many years. Today, we also find ourselves in that situation as a result of that effort. The summit in Johannesburg in 2002 was the starting point for many pieces of work, for many actions. ECLAC became a partner of Principle 10 that arose out of that summit, and picked up the glove in terms of organizing a regional meeting in October 22, which was the starting point where the states and civil society openly discussed the way in which Principle 10 was being developed and being implemented in Latin America. And in October 22, I also had the opportunity as an ECLAC delegate of making a statement during the first COP meeting of the Aarhus meeting about the results of that workshop, of that dialogue workshop between state and civil society, where we put forward to our European colleagues and to the European civil society the interest of Latin America in terms of working around this issue, looking at the Aarhus Agreement as the only example that existed at that time as a legally binding agreement at that time. I have vast experience in training on access law based on countless regional and sub-regional workshops financed by Swedish cooperation projects by the World Bank, and specifically in the implementation and compliance with the law, which forms part of the objective of the meeting. We worked in the development of indicators. We undertook a very interesting project with Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico, were the pilot countries, and many of them are candidates today, and they have participated in that. And that was a unique experience. And none of the countries had thought of measuring the performance of the regulation in terms of environmental aspects. And that for us was truly a very interesting experience. I also have a long list of publications, not only in terms of access rights, but it's linked to that aspect, and they are listed in my in the document related to my candidacy. Now, with regards to the independence of executive, legislative, and the judiciary, in my last position in the local government in Cordoba in Argentina, since 1995, I have no link with that, with those entities. So I feel that I am completely independent and autonomous in terms of working in the committee with that characteristic. And to conclude, I am reaching 8 minutes now, so I'm okay in time. I would like to say why I feel that the COP should choose me. And this, again, is somewhat uncomfortable for me because to talk about oneself is always uncomfortable. But I feel that I have a profound endearment and esteem for everything that has been involved in this unique Escazú process. And at a personal level, I feel that that is related to my institutional commitment. If I am elected, the knowledge, the experience, both with regards to the agreement and both in terms of its negotiation and spirit, the way in which we achieve something which is unique, and I refer to permanent and effective participation on the part of the public, something which is unique when it comes to international law in general, and the experience in the implementation and compliance with the law. 1 minute left. Okay. I feel that all that makes me an interesting candidate to be considered, bearing in mind this experience, this more than 30 years work experience to the support committee for implementation and compliance. I also have vast experience in terms of the provision of technical assistance and cooperation with countries in the region. I know their legislation, their institutions. I have studied them. And we have formed part of many, many projects that have been undertaken by countries. I form part of the environmental assessment teams of the OECD for Chile, Colombia, Peru, the Amazon, and an observer in the assessment by Spain. I am aware of the methodology. We have been working with compliance and implementation. And yes, I'm just rounding up, and I believe that that experience is very useful for the upcoming tasks of the committee, to serve the committee as a subsidiary entity of COP, understanding the subsidiary nature of the committee to the Conference of the Parties is very important. And one of the first tasks, or I would just like to say that organizing the way in which we work and the schedule of meetings would have to form part of the first actions. I apologize for just overstepping my time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Guillermo. We know it's a tight agenda, but that's the way it is today. So without further ado, we're going to invite Mariana Blengio Valdez from Uruguay. Same procedure. You have 10 minutes. Hopefully, you can stick to 9 minutes, and I'll let you know that when you're 1 minute out. So Mariana, you have the floor. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank, also just like my predecessor, I'd like to congratulate you. Today, I think we should celebrate because 5 years in the history of an agreement is something significant. And I also celebrate this substantial step that will be completed in April. Hopefully, I'm able to be part of that, of installing this third component of the Escazú Agreement, setting up this committee, something that I'm going to cover in a few minutes. So just to let you know that for me, it's an honor to promote the agreement with this instance. We are already doing it. I did it, as I will tell you now, and I did it from the very beginning, as I will tell you. So to the rest of the colleagues that will talk after me, my greetings, and also to ECLAC, my recognition. As you know, I'm a PhD in social sciences and law with a vast trajectory in terms of my legal training and specialization. So I will only cover the information that you all heard in my CV and everything related to more than 30 years of work in my own training, and not only my training, but that back and forth of so many people that we have trained from different positions in the academia and also from other positions in which I've been involved. I'd like to tell you that after studying the agreement and the rules, how to meet these three requirements as moral integrity, the recognized competence, and the independence, besides being factual things, is somewhat difficult. So I'd like to tell you that in terms of independence, I do not have any type of link that could prevent me from doing it, but that's part of my life because I've always been a liberal in the exercise of my profession. And whenever I was part of an organization, but I was outside the three powers of state. So I fully meet those requirements. And after thinking, there's something I can tell you. On August 31st, 2017, that day, the General Assembly in my country appointed me as a member of an ombudsman at a national human rights institution that, as you know, is completely outside of the executive, legislative, and judiciary powers. It is a collegiate organization, and as you know, have several very interesting things that lead me to the role of the committee itself. So reading Article 45 and 51 of Act 18446, in which I was honored to be appointed in that function, it is similar to Article 18.1 of the Escazú Agreement, and of course, it's confirmed by the rules that you have prepared. Having said that, I will mention the second part of this, the other 7 minutes, in which I must mention two things. What are the reasons why I should be able to be part of this committee and the conference that is sovereign, that can elect me? What would be my contribution? And I've broken this down into three main segments, small blocks, so to speak. But I will try to summarize. The first one is knowledge. Of course, like many of my colleagues, I have knowledge. I understand that I have a thorough and deep knowledge of this Escazú agreement that is part of a specification process, in terms of human rights regarding the environmental sustainability and equality. Equality regarding those categories that are specially protected, that places the individual and the environment at the core of this matter, and talks about access rights that I will not dwell on right now. And also, it links us with the public. And of course, we always work with the public in order to develop our work. The public is substantial, and we have seen it in this very transparent process of which you have also been able to witness regarding the systematization of this roster. So it is a unique agreement. It's a powerful agreement as well, and it's a regional agreement of the Americas that is intended to find solutions for our continent, that has background in other continents, but this was the path that was chosen, and the party states will face the challenge of going ahead with the implementation of this agreement. So it's key to reappraise the role of this committee, a committee that will perform a function that is not studied, and it's a major concern in my academic role. I've implemented it with certain subjects that I've introduced in terms of education and information purposes, which is the non-jurisdictional protection, because we are going to work on non-jurisdictional protection. If you read the features of this committee, non-punitive, non-sanctioning committee, which is totally transparent. Why non-jurisdictional? Because there's a whole procedure in terms of synergies with the state, with the party states, and the public and people who can establish communication. Somebody is talking into an open microphone, I believe. Okay, well, so the communications, please, if you could please shut off your microphone. The communications process seems to be very important. And considering that communications procedure that I've studied thoroughly, even in terms of the powers of the committee regarding the interpretation, which is, I think, the most important aspect, makes this agreement not to be void, but to go on the path that many treaties of United Nations have done with those committees that are created according to basic agreements of United Nations. That can be the civil and political, social, cultural rights, women's rights, the ones that link people with some kind of disability. And all those agreements have had that third component based on this agreement that is intended to have this back and forth cooperation role with the states, and of course, hand in hand with those who are also main role players, which is the public. So I can say that have knowledge on this in many respects, because it's something that I did somehow from a different perspective for 5 years, due to the kind of work that I developed that has already been completed. So it's going to be already a year that I completed that work, and that's the reason why I've been able to acquire this expertise. But I'd like to say something, and with this, I'll close with the next within the next 3 minutes to talk about expertise. In terms of academic achievements, I've expressed it, but I've done work in the field, in the different territories. Me, as a member of a human rights national institution, we did two things. We created a task force on environment and human rights, and I led that initiative for 5 years. That task force, at the time, I met Carlos de Miguel. Maybe you remember me at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Uruguay, in which we discussed many things, among others that I've just I was looking at this, thing that I forgot to mention, which is this other group of individuals, especially protected, which are environmental advocates. I discussed with Mr. De Miguel that topic at the time, and I wanted to mention this again before closing. I believe this is extremely important, the role that environmental advocates play. What did we do in our national institution? We broke down this topic within Uruguay, and we worked with all state institutions, building the first national Uruguayan report on the status and diagnostic with specific proposals regarding this topic. And then we created the regional network for the environment in the Ibero-American Federation of Ombudsmen. For me, as a Uruguayan national, we are on this third stage, which Uruguay is still supporting. The Escazú Agreement is relevant. It is an honor to be here and to be able to also support you, because I need to have the nationality of one of the countries, so I do have it as well. And Uruguay was there before at the beginning, and it's here now facing this huge challenge that Latin America and the Caribbean is facing, and really placing the individual in the right place and the right that is due in terms of protecting human rights and their fundamental freedom. So I'd like to thank you and congratulations, and I hope I'm able to be part of the group, and wish you all the best and best success. Thank you, Mariana, especially for being absolutely on time. Now I'd like to offer the floor to Rubens Ball from Brazil. Rubens, you also have 10 minutes. I'll let you know when 9 minutes are done. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be here in this condition as one of the nominees. I'd like to thank the leading team, ICLAC's team, the public representatives, the representatives of the party countries and observers, so that we can have a regional agreement that is thoroughly implemented in our entire region. Special greetings to the environmental ombudsmen that are present in the meeting or that are working in their own territories doing the advocacy of the environmental human rights. And that's why I'd like to highlight the importance of this Escazú Agreement beyond the three rights and of access. It is also an instrument that allows us to appraise and value the work of ombudsmen do in the territory. And first, I'd like to say that I believe it's worthwhile introducing myself from the professional point of view. I have almost 45 years involved in environmental matters. I started very young, and this spirit of youth makes me be a persevering individual. I believe all of us that are involved in the implementation of multilateral agreements, either binding or not, we must be persevering citizens, because we know that, for example, in French Revolution 2.5 centuries ago, égalité, fraternité, and these slogans are still challenges in France. So perseverance is a feature that we'll need, those of us who represent companies, countries, civil society, and other organizations. I'm a civil engineer. My original training. Then I took a degree in environmental engineering in 1983, almost 40 years ago, and then a master's degree and PhD in public health. And finally, when I was a little older, um, I studied law, and I'm going to explain why I went to law school. Because when I was very young, as a teenager, I thought that I was going to be a lawyer, and at last I was able to achieve my dream. And because I've worked on the preparation of the Brazilian position as an advisor to a representative that works in the defense of minorities, environment, and consumers. And I was able to prepare some of the articles of the Brazilian Commission that talk about the environment of indigenous populations, so the advocacy for consumers and the interests and rights that are diffuse.
So, my legal experience involves participation in legislative issues from the viewpoint of the defense of the rights of all citizens. During these years, ever since I became a civil engineer when I was 22 years old, I have also worked in the private sector and in the public sector, in government. And thus, I have the experience of being knowledgeable of the nature of different sectors of society, of the executive, of the private sector, of the legislative, and beyond that, and in parallel, and this was very valuable in the 70s and 80s, I was involved since 1977 with civil society groups. And therefore, I have more than 40 years of involvement with civil society in the defense of the environment and in the defense of rights. I remember I worked during the military dictatorship in Brazil with what was called here in Brazil the basic religious groups. I am not a Catholic, but I worked with them to defend the most vulnerable people, and that forms part of the scope of the Escazú Agreement. And now, with regards to participation, I also have a lot of experience in. I remember when I was young, And as Guillermo, I have spent more than 30 years working with international agreements, and I got involved with international issues during one of the public audiences of the Bruto Commission, the UN Commission for Development and the Environment, that was held in Brazil in 1985. And following the program Our Common Future in Brazil in 1987. Subsequently, I've also participated in various multi-stakeholder councils, the State Council for the Environment, the National Commission for Climate Change, the Brazilian committees for the Rio Summit, for the Human Dignity Summit, and I also took part as an activist of civil society in the Commission for Sustainable Development between 93, when it was established, and until 2012. And after that, this was taken on board by other UN entities. I have also taken part in various international negotiation processes with binding agreements. I remember before Rio, I participated in negotiations on climate change. And after Rio, in different COPs. I participated in many of the COPs on climate change, in the COP on desertification, on the COP related to biodiversity, and during the pandemic in other COPs. And thus I have the experience of dialogue with multi-stakeholders and with different sectors, with diplomats, with representatives of society, with representatives of academic institutions or rural scientific research entities. In other words, various stakeholders that help us to shape environmental governance, participative governance that is necessary for the effective implementation of agreements and of binding treaties or non-binding treaties. So that is a summary of a life that has been devoted to participation and to dialogue. And there I would like to deal with why I have presented my candidacy. Well, not only because of the contents of the Escazú Agreement, but because of the method that we were able to achieve 5 years ago. As mentioned by Irene in her opening words, this involved a cooperation and solidarity process among country representatives and also involving civil society, a commitment with human rights and with the efficacy of environmental policies in order to tackle the challenge that is expressed in many reports in terms of how to overcome the inequalities in our region and to promote justice when it comes to human development in our region. And I believe that in consequence, for the merit of the contents of the Escazú Agreement, what is very important is the method, and the method of dialogue. An international meeting cannot be implemented without a genuine open dialogue and a transparent dialogue. And that is the link between the contents and the method of the Escazú process. I had the privilege of participating in the 9 sessions of the Escazú Agreement between 2015 and 2018. Obviously, I was involved in other processes. I remember my participation in the Rio summit during the final negotiations of the Rio Declaration. And therefore, I believe that I have experience in dialogues with diplomats, not only from Brazil, but from different countries, and a commitment with transparency and with the effective and efficient implementation of agreements. I have published articles and books on environmental issues. I therefore consider that I have moral and technical capability to contribute to the committee. I greet the other candidates, but I can at least tell you that I am fully committed with the Escazú Agreement. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rubens, for being perfectly on time. And without further ado, I would like to offer the floor now to Rita Joseph Olivetti from Grenada. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you, Carlos. Good morning, everyone. I am both honored and delighted to be here at this forum. I am not going to overstay my time, I hope. My name is Rita Joseph Olivetti. I am a citizen and a resident of the island of Grenada. We call ourselves a tri-island state: Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. I am a lawyer by profession. I have been a lawyer for the last 40-odd years. I am also a retired judge of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. I served as a judge for about before those courts for approximately 10 years. And I also did a stint as a High Court judge, we call it a Supreme Court judge, in Belize. As such, I am well acquainted with the procedures of the court, the difficulties that litigants have to access justice in various fields, whether we talk of human rights, environmental issues, commercial, family law. So I am fully familiar, I would say, with what we need on the court to ensure that no one is left behind, which I think is a message that resounds throughout the Escazú Agreement. In terms of education, well, of course, I hold a law degree and I'm from England. I obtained my general legal certificate from the Hugh Wooden Law School in Trinidad. So I call myself a product of both, the best of both worlds, the English side and the Caribbean side. In terms of further education, I am a trained mediator and an arbitrator. And I think the principles of mediation and certainly mediation would be of great assistance having regard to the remit of the committee, the Escazú Committee Support and Implementation. In terms of independence from any governmental agencies or the government, I have no affiliation with them, with our government or any government agencies, since I retired from the judicial branch in 2013. In terms of ethics, I was chair of the ethics committee. We call it the ethics committee, but it's the General Legal Council under the Legal Education Act. And that's the Legal Profession Act, and that deals with the ethics of lawyers. So for 3 years, I was chair of that council who looked after the ethics or otherwise of the legal profession in Grenada. I was also chair of the committee to set up mediation, court-connected mediation in Antigua and Barbuda, where I served as a High Court judge for part of my time on the court. So that in terms, education. Now, why am I interested? My motivation for applying to be part of this committee. I see myself as seeing both sides of things. I recently, that's about 2, maybe 3 years ago, I became involved with an NGO, non-governmental organization, who wanted to challenge certain huge developments which were taking place in what they considered to be environmentally sensitive issues in Grenada. And I saw the difficulties they had in even getting information, being allowed to participate, again, limbs and important aspects of Escazú. the group was sort of sent from pillar to post when scurrying around, and even our laws, which provide our planning laws, which provided for access to some basic information, that was not obeyed by the authorities. Eventually, they felt obliged to seek redress from the courts, and that proved another difficult task. A long story short, they eventually were able to obtain a lawyer, and that fell through. And although I was retired and really not practicing, I volunteered my services to assist. We have been before the courts of Grenada since 2021. But the good news is, although we are dealing with standing again, access to justice was a pivotal point. The developers and the government took the initial challenge that we had no voice. We were not entitled to speak to those matters. And this challenge has continued until it is before our Court of Appeal. And after waiting from September, when the challenge was taken and dealt with at the High Court level, September, I just got news last week that the court will deliver a judgment on standing, just the threshold issue, on Wednesday. So we are keeping our fingers crossed. But that is another aspect which galvanized me and made me open my eyes to the difficulties our people have in seeking redress from the court, even in getting information from government. So the participation, the information, we've had consultations where people come in and they give you a slideshow of 5 minutes on a mega development. 5 minutes, this is what the development is about. What do you have to say? And then they say this is consultation. And this cannot be right. When I heard of Escazú, and I confess I didn't know anything about Escazú, even though our country had signed it initially, I think in 2019, it was like an eye-opener. This could be the instrument of change. This could ensure environmental justice for everyone and for Mother Earth. Hence my motivation. Have I forgotten anything? How could I be useful? If I am fortunate enough to become part of this committee, I see that my years as a lawyer, as a judge, looking at various aspects of the law and how it works or does not work in the Caribbean, because in our jurisdiction, we cover 9 countries. That would be extremely useful because one would be able to identify areas that would need support, that would need change, that would need amendment to enable the aims and objectives of Escazú to be fully realized. I am fully committed to seeing that our countries do not go the way of development at any cost. It has to be development, sustainable development with minimum damage to environment so that we ensure that we have something for our children and those to follow. And in terms of what we initially, I see the work of the committee, I think one of the focus has to be that awareness. I am speaking to people here in Grenada, and the first question I get is, but what is this Escazú? And as I said, our country signed 2019, and I guess it was signing and just putting the papers on somebody's desk. And very, very few people know about Escazú and what it means and could mean if our government comes on board and it is fully implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Joseph. We will continue with the next candidate. Mi miopía me hizo saltarme en la lista y pido
apologize because of my mistake, because I skipped Juan Carlos Carrillo from Mexico. So Juan Carlos, back to you, and my apologies. You have 10 minutes. I'm not going to give you any more seconds, though. Okay, thank you, Carlos. So thank you, everyone. I'd like to start by greeting the whole chair and all the states that are members of the Escazú Agreement, the people who represent the public. And please allow me to congratulate you first because of all the work done around this agreement to make this international agreement that to have become, since then, a landmark in terms of environmental law and even going beyond Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Juan Carlos Carrillo Fuentes. I'm a Mexican citizen. I became 51, my first 51 years. I have a PhD in law, and I worked in the Mexican government in the Natural Resources Fisheries Undersecretariat for 4 years, and for 23 years, I've been part of a civil society organization, Centro Mexicano de Derecho Ambiental, which is a non-for-profit organization with no political links, and what we do is to work in favor of the development and the application of environmental law. In my spare time, I practice meditation and capoeira. In order to answer regarding the information requested from me about who I am, I need to be very honest and express the thankfulness that I feel because of being part of this roster, sharing with people that I've admired since I was very young. So thank you very much. This is already a reward to me, because when we started working on the implementation of Principle 10 in Latin America and the Caribbean at the beginning of the century, when I had long hair and a bright future, we dreamt of an international binding agreement that would guarantee access rights. And today, 15, 20 years down the road, being part of this roster of candidates is a huge honor in my professional life, and I insist. Thank you very much. Now, why do I want to be part of this committee? Well, I want to contribute so that the Escazú Agreement to become consolidated as a benchmark in environmental law and human rights in general, so that it is a tool that will cause justice to favor regular citizens, people on the street, especially considering that we live in a region in which many people and groups have been excluded traditionally from justice, and that have made their lives more difficult, either because of a physical limitation, a wheelchair, or ethnicity, or sexual preference. And so the idea is to translate this international agreement to reflect the everyday lives of citizens whose reality was never imagined by legislators, because many times these aspects were not considered at the time when and this is particularly important in Latin America and the Caribbean, a region that is full of cultural wealth and biodiversity. And besides that, there are thousands of people who are not literate, or who are not computer savvy, like my mom. So we need to provide that benefit to many people. They're very resilient, but they live in vulnerability, as Escazú Agreement says. Now, quickly, in order to make the best out of time, in terms of moral integrity, why do I believe that I'm morally integral? First, consistency between my walk and my talk. I've been working for more than 20 years in a civil organization with non-for-profit with a huge impact, but in economic terms, well, you don't get the biggest benefits, and I've actually let other opportunities go because I'm convinced of the type of work we are doing. Not thinking of money. I do not have any conflict of interest, and however, of course, I raise my voice when due, and I'm quite critical and self-critical regarding many things. And third, I respect diversity and cosmovision diversity. I do not try to impose my vision as the only one, but I try to listen to the reality of all the parties to expand the picture and trying to address problems comprehensively to find the solutions and situations that involve many factors. As to the expertise regarding access rights since 2001, I've had the chance of following this topic up, working in civil society organizations. I'm founding member of the Iniciativa de Acceso México, where we have worked for more than 20 years to implement access rights nationwide and also regionally. This has allowed me to work in the application and development of methodologies to assess government's performance, to identify opportunities, to build synergies with civil society, with academia. I've also, this allowed me to create certain inputs, working in the development of inputs for the Escazú Agreement, in promoting its ratification and signature, always with a legal environmental perspective and from the point of view of the civil society. That has also allowed me to work on many international fora regarding the Rio de Janeiro Declaration, Principle 10 of Rio, but also the Escazú Agreement, and then take this information to explain it as easily as possible to communities and human rights advocates. This has meant a lot of work that ranges from legal diagnostic publications, but also developing cartoons, videos, in order to make it as simple as possible to people who belong to indigenous and rural communities, according to the need. Applying this knowledge, in 2019, we were awarded the second place in forestry transparency, an award provided by the government in terms of access to environmental information. As of 2021, I've coordinated a diploma on environmental law, and we devote an entire module to Escazú. Module is one of the most important parts of that diploma degree. Last year, I coordinated a work with the involvement of close to 80 people in organizations in order to generate a series of citizens reforms to align the Escazú Agreement with the main Mexican laws. I've experienced the insecurity in 2018 in the car. 4 of us were riding on a car, people who worked on environmental reform, protecting indigenous populations, communities. We received 3 shots. I do not have any type of relationship with any government or individuals that may have any link with governments in Latin America. However, I've been part of the government at the end of the last century, and that gives me the chance of knowing up to where you can go and what other possibilities you have as a government in the region. Now, what do I think I can contribute as part of the committee? First, to foster specialized social participation that facilitates governments and people in those states to deepen the knowledge and the exercise of access rights and the Escazú rights. This means lots of dialogue, lots of communication with people's representatives, with individuals who come from the executive powers of different governments, of each one of the party states, to be able to contribute with specialized and novel legal perspectives. I want to contribute to lay the foundations to establish the modality of the work of this committee, the work agenda where we are today, without detailed rules, and where do we want to be in 8 more years. We need to resume the use of certain inputs, for example, proposals coming from the work groups that Olivia mentioned. They are quite interesting. We'll see if we can resume that, to resume the experience of the Adjuso Commission, of the North America Environmental Committee, or the Colombian Committee. We need to study what can we use and how we can improve it. And I can also contribute with certain sensitivity to understand and to build links with the socio-cultural realities in Latin America. We have a lot to learn from legal pluralism and cultural diversity in the region. Besides, and I'm about to close, I think it is quite important to emphasize on the preventive use of the Escazú Agreement and focus on meeting Article 9 and to provide more certainty and safety to people who defend human rights, to promote conflict resolution mechanisms and the powers of this committee to provide advisory and assistance to the parties. And in that sense, and I will close now, it is extremely important to know the legal rules, so that by respecting the same rules, we can think out of the box and therefore make progress in the implementation of the Escazú Agreement and to find solutions that are comprehensive to cover multifactorial problems such as the ones that we face in these issues regarding to access to information, engagement, and justice. Thank you very much, and it is an honor to be part of this meeting. Thank you, Juan Carlos. Right on time, on the dot. And I'd like to now offer the floor to Patricia Madrigal. Patricia, you have the floor, 10 minutes. When we are on minute 9, I will let you know unless you are done earlier than that. Good morning, and it is really a pleasure, and I'd like to congratulate all for being part of this pre-COP for the second conference of the parties. Greetings to the board members of the public, the representatives of the party states and signatory countries, the secretariat, observers, and to this roster of distinguished colleagues that are part of it and that aspire to be part of this process and of this committee, and they have already been part of the process itself. Okay, as Guillermo said, it is quite difficult to introduce ourselves, I guess. It is hard, but I always say, my name is Patricia Madrigal Cordero, and I'm a lawyer. I'm an attorney at law, specialist in international public law of the University of Costa Rica. And right now, that specialty has an agreement with the Instituto Interamericano de Derechos Humanos. So I perfectly understand the right to a clean environment as part of one of the human rights. And then I took my PhD in the University of Alicante in Spain. And the approach was the Department of State Affairs. So the strengthening of the rule of law was one of the important strategic frameworks. As a coordinator of the environmental legislation organization of YCN, I did the training and reviewing the regulatory frameworks of the member states. And the beginning of 2000s, we started developing the diagnostic of access rights, the diagnostic of access rights, and then the environmental democracy index. And I've been part of the access initiative, from which the network of civil society organizations have been driving also the Escazú Agreement process originally. So it's more than 30 years of experience in human rights and environmental law. And I'd like to be part of this committee in order to support the party states in the application and compliance of the Escazú Agreement as part of these technical guidelines and strategic guidelines that should consider the social, economic, political, and cultural context of Latin America and the Caribbean.
La decisión fue que este comité fuera consultivo y la decisión también fue que el acuerdo de Escazú tuviese una aplicación gradual y progresiva. Y el artículo 1 nos convoca a fomentar la cooperación y el fortalecimiento de capacidades. Así que es imperativo mantener la participación significativa del público, como lo ha sido hasta ahora, fortaleciendo también sus capacidades y aprovechando las contribuciones que han venido presentando en el proceso. Creo que puedo aportar desde mi experiencia, desde mi visión, para sentar las bases procedimentales y operativas que permitan el cumplimiento de los objetivos para los cuales ha sido establecido este comité, como un órgano subsidiario de la Conferencia de las Partes y manteniendo un estrecho contacto con la mesa directiva. En el proceso del acuerdo, en los diagnósticos que hemos ido realizando, me ha correspondido trabajar tanto desde sociedad civil en el proceso preparatorio como en el proceso de negociación como viceministra de Ambiente. Me correspondió liderar la delegación de Costa Rica desde el 2014 hasta el 2018 y ejercer la copresidencia de la mesa directiva junto con Chile. Trabajé conjuntamente con el Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores y serví de puente con la sociedad civil, canalizando sus propuestas y escuchando sus preocupaciones. Procuré involucrar a todos los países de la región en la negociación e ir sumando más países en este proceso. Y entiendo que se debe conocer y considerar tanto las preocupaciones de los estados parte como las aspiraciones del público y mantener ese delicado equilibrio. Después de terminar el cargo de la gestión pública en mayo del 2018, me he dedicado a promover la firma, ratificación o adhesión del Acuerdo de Escazú en la región. He visitado los congresos de Ecuador, de Colombia, participado activamente en Costa Rica, pero los procesos de ratificación no siempre son fáciles. Y un ejemplo de ello es mi propio país, en donde una campaña de desinformación ha impedido que este proceso avance como hubiésemos querido. Pero ha sido también una oportunidad para ampliar los procesos de divulgación y análisis con los diferentes sectores sociales. Creo firmemente que el Acuerdo de Escazú como instrumento regional ambiental, resultado del multilateralismo, puede fortalecer la democracia ambiental, mejorar el cumplimiento de los derechos humanos y con ello fortalecer nuestros estados de derecho. Y bueno, me parece que la independencia en el trabajo se demuestra por la práctica. Sin embargo, se puede decir que no he recibido ningún proceso disciplinario en el ejercicio de toda esta carrera profesional, que he participado siempre entendiendo desde el lugar donde lo hago y transparentemente expresado así. No tengo ninguna relación en este momento con el gobierno, ni tengo personas con parentesco cercano que desempeñen puestos en el gobierno y no tengo previsto ser nombrada o contratada en esto. ¿Y de qué manera enfocaría el comité en este primer periodo? Bueno, ser parte de esta lista corta nos presenta el enorme reto de establecer las bases para que el comité pueda desarrollar su trabajo. Sabemos, como nos lo dijo el señor presidente de la mesa, que es consultivo, transparente, no contencioso, no judicial, no punitivo, pero además en las modalidades adoptadas en la decisión 1.3 se agregó con la participación significativa del público y la consideración de las capacidades de los estados parte. Como órgano subsidiario debemos apoyar y fortalecer a la conferencia de las partes y como órgano decisorio del acuerdo, pero igual debe trabajar con la secretaría, la mesa directiva, el público, los estados, y al establecer estas bases procedimentales se debe recordar el reglamento de funcionamiento en primer lugar, donde se detallan una serie de temas como las normas de admisión, razones de inadmisibilidad, etc. Y retos propios del Acuerdo de Escazú, como el artículo 9 sobre defensores y defensoras ambientales, y el papel que el comité puede jugar en el cumplimiento de este artículo, así como considerando a las personas y grupos en situaciones de vulnerabilidad que, según lo establece el acuerdo, deben recibir una atención especial. La comunicación entre los estados parte del público es fundamental para mantener el ambiente de confianza en que ha caracterizado el proceso de la negociación, pero enfrentamos un reto crucial en el tema de financiamiento, ya que la decisión 1.3 establece que la secretaría prestará sus servicios con sujeción a la disponibilidad de recursos. Y eso plantea un enorme reto para el comité para poder cumplir sus objetivos. Así que se debe hacer una valoración de los recursos necesarios para un adecuado funcionamiento, para poderlo presentar a la conferencia de las partes y que exista un presupuesto mínimo en comunicación con la mesa directiva. Y dentro de las funciones otorgadas en la decisión, que son más o menos como 7 u 8, se debe definir también la forma en que personas o entidades expertas en materias técnicas o jurídicas puedan contribuir y apoyar la labor del comité según lo establece también la decisión. Así que
Patricia,
son
un
grandes... Ya me sonó mi campanita. Así que son grandes retos para el establecimiento de las bases de este órgano subsidiario fundamental para la aplicación y el cumplimiento, que es sin duda el reto no solo del Acuerdo de Escazú, sino de la normativa ambiental en general y en estos días un poco aciagos también de los derechos humanos. Agradezco el trabajo que hizo la mesa directiva y quedo a las órdenes para cualquier consulta o observación que pueda existir. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Patricia. Colegas, ¿pueden chequear la interpretación del inglés? Aparentemente había un cambio en los canales. Please, colleagues, check the interpretation in English. It might be a change in the channels, but please confirm that it's working. It seems that the English interpretation is in Spanish. So please, colleagues, English-speaking colleagues, that you select Spanish to listen English, which is a bit confusing, but seems that there was a problem with the other channel. Okay. Pasemos entonces ahora.
Let's now move on to Ms. Gavern Mitchell from Trinidad and Tobago. And now,
10 minutes. I will tell you when you have complete 9. So now you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. My apologies for not being seen. I believe the host would have to allow my video to be shown. I want to begin by thanking you all for the opportunity to be rostered as a nominee for the Committee on Implementation and Compliance. I would like to start off by saying, well, my name is Gavin Mitchell. I am a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm an attorney at law by profession. I would begin with my motivation and then give you all a breakdown of my work history. So my motivation for wanting to be on the committee is because as a private citizen, I believe that I have a positive contribution towards what the work of the committee is geared towards. I would have reviewed Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration, and it would be in keeping with the fact that it allows for participation of all concerned citizens. As a private citizen, I believe that the skills that I have acquired through my legal career would be applicable and can be used well on the committee of the implementation and compliance of the Escazú Agreement. I have, as part of my career, I have worked in environment for the entirety of my career. So firstly, I would have worked for Water Authority, and then I spent over 10 years working at the Environmental Authority, Environmental Management Authority. My work would have dealt a lot with implementing a lot of international agreements. So I would have worked on things like creating policy and framework legislation for the Basel Convention and the control of transboundary movement of hazardous waste and the disposal. I have worked with the DREF crew on implementing sustainable management mechanisms for the persistent organic pollutants throughout some Caribbean countries. I've been a member of the National Ozone Committee for Depleting Substances, which again was geared towards implementation. I have also been trained in relation to capacity building and environmental management in the context of climate change. A lot of my work has been focused on different aspects of environmental regulation, and I have had the fortunate opportunity to work on all aspects of access rights, which is the subject matter of the Escazú Agreement. At the Environmental Management Authority, I would have worked as the alternate Freedom of Information Officer for over 8 years. In that capacity, I would have been able to delve into providing access to environmental information. And in so doing, I would have attended initial presentations on the content of the regional agreement, as the Escazú Agreement. And I've also attended education, climate change, and looking at legislation for sustainable development with a focus on the Escazú Agreement. In that capacity, I have always followed the Escazú Agreement since its adoption. I always encouraged my colleagues and the organization that I was then a part of to look into this agreement to see how it can strengthen what we do at the organization to build public confidence and trust, so that you can see that the organization does want to share environmental information, because it's for the general benefit of the citizenry, so that we can have a future, a planet that we could call home beyond the next 20, 30 years that is under observation at this time. So in relation to, I will start with the moral standing. Morally speaking, I am a person who stands for what is right. I am a very firm believer of doing the right thing. I am a member of the local arm of Transparency International, which is the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute. I'm a very active member of the Institute, and the Institute's primary goal is to combat corruption, but with the focus on transparency, integrity, and accountability. At the Institute, we help a lot of victims. This would include environmental defenders, people who come forward and recognize that certain things and there's an open and inclusive government, for example, and we help to make representations on behalf of those persons as a civil society organization. So I do believe that I have the moral standing required to be on the committee. In relation to recognize competence in access rights, I would have mentioned earlier that I was the alternate Freedom of Information Officer. In that role, I would have received applications from members of the public who wanted access to environmental information. I would have shared the information, reviewed it, give feedback to the organization on the rights of the applicant, and it was always an independent role, and it's something that I was able to assist the applicant, which we never had any litigation, because people felt that when they applied, they would have gotten the information they requested for. Even if there was a refusal, there was transparency in the reasons for giving that refusal. I would have also looked at redacting documents that may have had sensitive information to allow it to be disclosed. In addition to that, I would have worked with the National Overseeing Committee for Freedom of Information, and we would create documents, basically data giving information on what was approved, what was denied, what is still being, what we're trying to still give information on. We would give information on what we told them, respecting their rights to appeal the decisions of the organization. I would have looked at that in context of Article 5 of the Escazú Agreement, and I believe that I would be able to give very, very good assistance with respect to information rights in relation to public participation in decision-making. I have been engaged in a lot of litigation with respect to those rights being interfered with or abridged by the state. My role as counsel in this matter, well, in these matters, because there have been several that I've participated in, when we receive judgments that would have informed the organization of some restriction or limitation on the rights of the citizen, it will be my role to actually advise the organization how to adjust and implement correct procedures going forward so that participation does not be something that we accuse of not engaging with the public, right? I would have worked a lot on national registers and would have advised on what should be shared to increase transparency. In relation to access to justice in environmental matters, I would have, as stated before, engaged in litigation both at the regular high court level through judicial review. And fortunately enough, we have a environmental court called the Environmental Commission. And I was fortunate because I have training in alternative dispute resolution. So apart from litigation, there's also mediation, and I have participated in several rounds of mediation with successful outcomes at the Environmental Commission. In relation to mediation, one other point I would like to make is that in order to access the courts, I would have reviewed the rules for participation, because it's not only for the regulator, but also for citizens at large. And in so doing, you want to ensure that the rules allow for maximum participation. I spoke to I work along with a lot of civil society organizations, a lot of environmental defenders and advocates for the environment. In a nutshell, I would have basically worked on regarding to non-compliance and given guidance.
Ms. Mitchell, you have 1 minute, and I suggest you to open the camera so the people can watch you in your last minute.
Okay, I still cannot open the camera, right? The host has stopped it. So the last thing I would like to say on access rights is that I would use moral suasion, and I believe this is what the work of the organization, the committee is, to give information and reports. I am independent from the executive and the judiciary and the legislature. I have no dealings with them in particular. And finally, the work of the committee, when we get in there, is to select the chair and the chairman and set out a work program. And I believe that we can spearhead and go provide reports as required. Okay, thank you for your time. I believe I'm finished, and I apologize again for the video.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Mitchell. Afterwards, we will check if you can open the camera so the people may meet you, although virtually. Y ahora vamos a darle la palabra a Andrés Napoli. Andrés, siguiendo el protocolo, tienes
Andrés Napoli, you have 10 minutes. Go ahead. Good morning. Thank you, Carlos, for the invitation. Greetings to the country representatives, members of the board, the secretariat, through you, of course, my dear friends and elected representatives of the audience, and of course, the candidates that are part of this roster, but also all those that applied for it, because they were a very important list of representation, capabilities, and knowledge. So I congratulate Escazú, and congratulations also for this 5 years. Well, Let me introduce myself. I'm an attorney at law. I have a master's degree in environmental law by Professor Ramon Martín Mateo and some other specialization in oil and gas. I work on environmental issues for a few decades. Most of my activity has taken place together with the Fundación Ambiente y Recursos Naturales de Argentina, which is an NGO. Whose main activity has to do with promoting environmental law, environmental public policies with a strong footing on access, rights, participation, information, and justice. This is what I can, in everything I can tell you that I've done has to do with access rights. When we found out about the Arhus Agreement, we started dreaming or either joining that Arhus Agreement or to have an agreement for the region that was achieved later on. That was an objective we had all along. Through what I've done in the organization, my path has covered environmental citizens control, which was an environmental litigation program, one of the first ones created in Argentina. Then I was in charge of the citizens participation or engagement area. And I am an action man, not as a theory man. I've done some theoretical work, although, but as part of the action, we have used the access rights tools to protect the rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution. That's why we became part of an important litigation, maybe one of the most important ones, which is the Riachuelo litigation, together with the Ombudsman, a very important case in Argentina. I believe many of you know it, the case of Mendoza. Another important litigation, which is the Barragán case of highways that caused a major environmental impact on Buenos Aires. I do not pride myself of these two cases because after decades we've been trying to implement them, but I believe the huge challenge of the environment is to achieve implementation. As Rubens said, it's not for 10 minutes, but it's to actually spend a significant time, and we need to persevere in these topics. This is a challenge of implementation of Escazú. And another litigation that I'd like to mention is the first Argentinian litigation that mentions Escazú, which is fund with YPF, which is access to public information, Vaca Muerta deposit, which is considered also by Escazú. Our organization litigates with more than 300 cases a year. You can even see that on our website. But we have also trained and we have established a dialogue with officials in the municipalities. That is institutional space that is in touch with the citizens that has to provide the information to the citizens. We have published some publications, such as a recent publication with Michel Pries regarding access to information, engagement, and justice, and many of you participated in it. The Escazú Agreement from early stages, I heard Guillermo Acuña in Mexico already, but then joining the Access Initiative and then working with the focal points prior to the negotiation committee back from 2014 to 2018 and then extending it to 2022 as elected public representative, one of the most interesting experiences that I've carried out in my professional life. And also, we should consider the ratification process in Argentina. It's a very quick and successful process. We were lucky enough to, this is important also, Argentina ponete la 10, with the idea that Argentina should be the 10th country to ratify the agreement. Of course, mentioning that soccer jersey soccer shirt that Maradona used to wear and now Messi wears, number 10. Also, I worked not in the executive power, but I worked from the point of view of advisory to the Senate and the Energy and Environment Committees between 1998 to 2005, and also advising municipalities in some places of the country to create protected areas with participatory projects. We very challenging experiences in that regard. Somehow to get to know the challenges that the state faces. In this new stage, we have new challenges. The challenges of building an agreement were important, of course. The binding, robust agreement in terms of rights that would consider environmental ombudsmen, all issues that we've discussed today, that was complex. And the challenges today are new. Some of them are extremely important, as Patricia said, to have more countries join us. We shouldn't lose sight of that fact of collaborating with the colleagues of the countries and the representatives of the countries so that they can join the agreement, so that they can ratify it. And of course, the challenge of implementation, in which the compliance committee will play significant roles. They're not going to be only one. I would say action where they need to work with a significant capacity to deal with the severe issues that the region faces and the solutions that can be achieved. So we need to collaborate with the Conference of the Parties to issue the necessary directives that are related to the implementation with the countries, to design institutions, and to those countries to implement this effectively, to help them interpret what the Escazú Agreement wants to tell us in each one of its components and texts. And a lot of work with the board of leadership and the public for the results to be effective, not only just to gather frustration in participatory processes, what they cause and may end up. But we need to preserve the Escazú Agreement. We need to achieve those effective steps so that people recognize that this is important. Of course, to conduct all the efforts to coordinate and to cause the agreement to be known. This is a not very well known agreement. We need to drive that knowledge about it. We shouldn't lose direct contact with the issues in the region, but also provide solutions from that point of view. As Patricia said, and I summarize, there's this compliance committee sets out the basis for the operation, but those foundations must foresee that the transparency, access to information, engagement, and justice principles, which are the principles that guide the Escazú Agreement, are always present in each action, and also to find the immediate protection and effective protection mechanisms for environmental ombudsmen. We need to make our biggest effort in that regard, at least in the initial stages of the process. Now, as to the obstacles, well, I do not have currently, I always say it from that point of view, the moment when we're talking now, we have no obstacles today ethically to join. I do not have any type of relationship with the state. I haven't had it for many years. I work with an NGO, though, but that doesn't mean that I cannot perform this function and the challenges of Escazú. If you ask me, what is the main contribution that I can make to this committee is expertise. Clearly, acquired this along an important career path. What are the limitations of the Secretariat? What can we do to improve those processes? So I believe experience is what I can contribute with. Finally, in closing my remarks, I'd like to thank you all. Congratulations for applying to this committee. And you're all kindly will be welcome in Argentina. Thank you, Andres. Without further, I would like to offer the floor to Carol Denise Angela Stephen, known by Carol Excel.
Now you have the floor. You have 10 minutes following the same protocol.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the chairs, the parties, signatories, observers, and representatives of the public for this opportunity. It's really my pleasure and privilege to be here today to present my candidacy. My name is Carol Stevens Excel, and I'm an environmental lawyer and a national from Jamaica. I have a law degree. I'm an environmental lawyer with a degree from the University of the West Indies in 1995, and also attended the Norman Malley Law School. I have a master's in environmental law from the Aberdeen University in Scotland, and I'm a trained mediator, having been certified at the Dispute Resolution Foundation in Jamaica. And just recently, I was certified as a trained facilitator. So that's a little bit about my background. I'm a mother of two and an avid music and film lover. So a little bit of personal information about myself. I am really excited to be considered for a member of the Implementation and Compliance Committee of the Escazú Agreement. And if I was selected, I would bring to this role over 20 years of experience advocating for environmental rights, focusing both on the passage and implementation of access to information laws, public participation procedures in policy and planning and practice, experience working with very vulnerable groups and communities in the Caribbean, and also seeking strong rules for access to justice in Jamaica through my work, both in government and also I worked for many years as a board member of the Jamaica Environmental Trust as well, and working all over Latin America and also the world in my experience and in my career in working for the World Resources Institute. I just wanted to start off by saying that most of my professional life has actually been both working in government and also working in civil society. So I think I would bring a unique perspective of both seeing what it takes internally to be able to deliver on access rights, but then also working in civil society and trying to use and ensure the appropriate implementation of these rights. I've worked, when I worked in Jamaica as a legal director at the National Environmental and Planning Agency, I had to work directly with communities all across the island, providing and ensuring they had appropriate procedures for public participation, ensuring they had access to information, responding to complaints for failure of the government to provide them access to information or access to justice. And then also, when I left government, I had also the privilege of working in civil society to try and ensure that access rights in Jamaica worked for local communities and civil society organizations. So having both been worked on both sides of the fence, I think that would be unique in my experience. I've also, I think, really been motivated to apply for this position because I believe in the importance of democratic decision-making about the environment and especially about climate change. And the need to ensure, of course, that environmental human rights defenders have a space and enabling environment to be able to speak up, to have the right and freedoms of assembly and association that are spoken about in the Escazú Agreement in Article 9. And I have a deep appreciation of the need to create those clear rules all across the region, having the opportunity and privilege to work across the region through the entire process of the negotiation of the Escazú Agreement, supporting both the negotiation, the initiation, the negotiation and passage, being there actually in Rio in Brazil, I'm looking at Ruben here, when we actually got the passage of the declaration to start this process, and then attending multiple negotiations and engaging both with governments and civil society through the entire process to try and support both clear understanding and setting of standards for the region, and setting of standards in a way that we think that can be achieved fairly across the region, and then also working on the adoption and passage. So my motivation really has been in this is a core part of my life, my career, and then it's been a core part of who I am to be able to be privileged to work with many of you here to ensure that this agreement comes into force, and now to see it at the stage of implementation it's just really a privilege to be there and be considered to be part of this moving forward. In terms of moral standing and expertise, I also am really kind of not clear how to say that, but I think I've showed up both in person and in this process in a way with integrity and high moral standing. I've stood in partnership with the youth champions of Escazú, bringing them into the Escazú Agreement process. I've stood hand in hand with bringing environmental human rights defenders to speak at meetings that ECLAC has held. I've also worked very closely with government representatives, both from the Caribbean and Latin America throughout this process. And also international agencies, UNEP and UN ECLAC, I've worked really closely with them. And I definitely, I think I've shown up in a way that people can see my integrity and morals. I'm also currently independent of the legislative and judicial powers. I currently work for a climate change foundation that's looking to ensure that communities get a say in providing solutions to climate change. So I don't have any connections to any of the governments in Annex 1. I also believe that that in terms of my expertise, that I have expertise both in environmental law and on environmental democracy. I have done capacity building all across the region, especially in the Caribbean, on access to information laws, on public participation, and participated in many capacity building efforts, both in Jamaica, from the judiciary to working with freedom of information officers, to working with civil society to build their understanding of the agreement. And also worked internationally with many governments to also share experiences on implementation and practice of access rights, of these rights of access to information, participation, and access to justice, both through the negotiations and afterwards. So I think I can bring a lot of expertise in that way. I've also written many publications. I'm currently finalizing one that looks at the Escazú Agreement and vulnerable groups and looks at case studies all across the region, trying to understand what will need to be happening to ensure implementation of these rights for vulnerable groups. And I believe that will be one of the greatest challenges of implementation, that and also the provisions on environmental human rights defenders. I believe that many countries have made great strides in implementing some of these rights. But when it comes to vulnerable groups and the barriers that they face, cost, challenges of language, challenges of distance, challenges of being unfamiliar with processes, being illiterate or not being able to read, they provide great challenges to ensure implementation. And so I'm very excited about that publication that we're working on to try and understand what's the gap and how countries can fill that gap. And I hope to be able to bring that experience if I'm elected as a candidate. I've also had multiple experiences in assessing laws and practices across the entire region with the Environmental Democracy Index when I worked at the World Resources Institute, and particularly with a publication that I just, when I was at the World Resources Institute, I launched in 2022, which was a legal and policy assessment tool to help governments to assess their laws and policies to be able to ensure they can be able to ratify or accede to the agreement, which was piloted with the kind guidance of the government of St. Lucia and Jamaica to help them in their processes of doing ratification. I worked on that publication with Daniel Andrade Goff, who is a member representative of the public, and I hope it can be a very important tool in implementation. I also believe that just from my experience, both in government and understanding how to look at a regional agreement and then look at how to implement it locally, it would be very useful in Implementation and Compliance Committee, because I've had to do that when I worked in the government of Jamaica. It was one of the requirements to look at international agreements and try to ensure that we are in compliance as part of my role. Also, I think really important to this role is understanding across the region and being able to do reports on progress that has been made on implementation and compliance. And in my work at the World Resources Institute, which is a global think tank, I had to do many indicator assessments to try and understand implementation and compliance and the power of these rights to be able to ensure that you have more equity and progress towards sustainable development. And I think some of that experience also would be very useful in ensuring appropriate consultations and dialogues, both with the public, but also with parties. I also bring to this role some of my experience in other appellate systems, and this is a non-judicial and non-adversarial implementation and compliance committee, and I'm currently a member of the Access to Information Appeals Board of the World Bank, and my tenure ends soon. But I bring
One minute, Carol.
Okay, I bring with that experience in how to address disputes and create observations and recommendations on implementation. I also, I think, have a special interest, and I think this will be one of my focuses as well, on environmental human rights defenders. The rules of the committee require that we put in place procedures, especially where we believe any complaint, any person that's bringing a complaint could be attacked and threatened. And I have experience specifically looking at environmental human rights defenders and understanding how to ensure their protection in processes. So I could bring that to the position. I think really important moving forward. Some of the first things the committee will have to do is really create an agenda and look at the modalities to ensure implementation, creating a timetable and understanding how to do reporting, how to ensure that parties understand how to come to committee, and also how the members of the public as well understand the role of the committee. So making that a priority, I think, will be essential. Thank you all for listening to me. I think I would bring my legal expertise, my personal commitment to a rights-based approach, my experience in working internationally and locally, and my really passion for ensuring capacity building and cooperation to learn and ensure the implementation of these rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Solo un pequeño aviso antes de dar la palabra al último candidato.
Just some information before we offer the floor to the last candidate. Once we finish the round, if anybody has a specific question, a clarifying question related to the interventions by some of the candidates, who will answer 3 questions. You have to write your questions in writing, but in view of time, we don't have time for more questions. So please ask your questions in writing to the candidates so that he or she may clarify some of the things that they have mentioned. So finally, but not less important, we have with us Felix Wing from Panama. Felix, you have 10 minutes following the same procedure. Please go ahead, Felix. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being able to participate in this meeting. I would like to warmly greet many colleagues whom I had not seen for a long time now, and who have participated, as we all know, during different stages of the process, as from governments and as from civil society, as from the public. I would like to begin by saying that it's a tremendous honor for me to form part of this distinguished group of candidates. All of them have enormous merits, as we have been able to hear, and they have a strong commitment with the Escazú Agreement and with the process that was launched a few years ago. I personally had the opportunity of participating or of joining this process since the first meeting of focal points appointed by governments prior to the signature of the declaration related to Principle 10 as an independent expert at that time of civil society, and subsequently when the negotiation process took place of the Escazú Agreement, I had the opportunity of being one of the main negotiators of the government of Panama as General Secretary and Vice Minister in charge of the environment in my country. So I can very proudly say, but also very humbly say, that I had formed part of this process that contains the DNA of so many people, so full of merit. That is to talk to you about me. I'm a lawyer. I graduated from the University of Panama. I have an international law degree, master's degree from the American University in Washington, D.C. I studied with Leili Hunter, as that many of you know, who has been one of the main defenders of access rights. And on the other hand, I've also had the opportunity of working not only for civil society organizations, but also for international entities of the UN system, such as the UN, the environmental program of the United Nations, and with governments. As an official of the environmental ministry, but I also acted as an assistant to a Supreme Court judge, one of the most independent judges that our judiciary has had. And indeed, as part of that legal work, I was able to project sentences in very significant cases with regards access rights and environmental law as guarantees of human rights and their progressive development. I have also worked in academia as a lecturer in international law, which is my main specialization, and also dealing with human rights and environmental law, which is that I've also specialized in when I was a graduate student and a master's student, and also in terms of providing continuous training to legal officials, government officials, and members of civil society and of communities, because it's also important to mention that I've had the possibility of working in the defense of the environment as an environmental defender, but also in the defense of environmental defenders in the legal sphere via the litigation in cases which involved threats to the integrity of legal defenders, and in the inter-American system, in the inter-American human rights system, where we submitted several reports on access to justice and also on environmental defenders vis-a-vis the situation of mining operations in Latin American countries. Now, this is something about myself, and I would like to immediately refer now to what has been requested of us during this brief intervention. With regards to moral integrity, as some of my predecessors have mentioned, that is shown in practice. And integrity, as people say, implies doing the right thing, even if nobody is looking. And that means that there has to be full coincidence in terms of what one says and what one does. We have often said many things about how things should be, how the law should be implemented, what things are needed, which international standards are not being adhered to. We have also said, mentioned the challenges that states face, especially in this complex situation as a result of the pandemic and as a result of the war. And the government needs to deal with. And the committee, I believe, will have to play a role, as mentioned by my predecessors, a tremendously important role in terms of helping governments to adjust their own domestic legislations to international standards and international law on human rights, and also in terms of rights of access, guided by the progressive development, which must be a characteristic of all human rights related to the environment and to more vulnerable groups, but in a very complex situation because of the political, economic, and also cultural limitations. That is one of the main concerns of states. And so all these elements are elements that the committee will have to bring together. And in that sense, I believe that the knowledge and experience that I have obtained during 30 years of professional work, even before I graduated, will be useful for governments in order to promote access rights in each one of our countries, considering the differences in terms of the level of evolution of legal systems within the legal systems. And let's remember that in our region, we have several legal systems coexisting, and therefore the committee will have to take this into consideration in the development of these considerations and in this establishment of international standards when it comes to rights of access in our region. Much of this has already been worked in AUKUS and in other control mechanisms of the UN and of the inter-American system, for example, and therefore much of that is something that we will be able to benefit from in order to develop these rights. Now, with regards independence, as mentioned by my predecessors, this is something that has to be shown in practice. I am not only independent of state powers, despite the fact that I have formed part of some of them and I have collaborated or worked with some of them in legislative terms, for example, many of us have had to work on the modification of laws or the development of new regulations. And in terms of environmental litigation, well, definitely our integrity and our independence is evidenced precisely in a very transparent fashion, as I had mentioned beforehand. I believe that the main contribution that I can personally make to this committee, considering the experience that I have had both with the most vulnerable groups, with environmental defenders, and with the high spheres of government, and also at the level of achieving consensus at an international level, is precisely the search for that consensus, the search to try to conciliate interests, considering that there are values that are non-negotiable, and what we want is to make them evolve in a positive fashion without us falling behind in that effort. But at the same time, we must create and build capacities, because to truly promote international standards when it comes to access rights, not only with the interpretations of the committee, but also with the implementation on the part of each state party at a national level, and even at a subnational level, we need to build capacities. And for that purpose, we need permanent training. We need to provide that permanent training not only to government officials, but also to the various stakeholders, the public, environmental defenders, and so on, so that we can all speak a common language as far as possible, always guided by the Escazú Agreement and its spirit and what it stipulates. I thank you again for the opportunity you have given me, and wish the best of success to those that are elected by the Conference of the Parties to this committee, because I believe that it will undertake a very important work during this consolidation stage. Thank you very much. Thank you, Felix. We thank the 10 candidates that have been nominated for being on time. We know, as from the Secretariat and the presiding officers, that 10 minutes to answer all the questions and to introduce yourselves is a very short period of time, but we have reviewed this, and we also have the documentation that you have provided that has also been shared to all the parties of the agreement. And of course, if you have any additional doubts, well, at the moment there are no more questions, but we will be able to contact you in the future. So as for the Secretariat, we would like to mention that we are truly thankful to all 49 candidates that were presented, and the decision to reach that number of 10. Well, it was a very difficult task for the presiding officers, and what is upcoming for the future will be even more difficult. So now we would like to conclude with this point in the agenda, and now move on to the other point in the agenda, which is related to how we are going to organize the Conference of the Parties. And for that purpose, I would like to offer Marcelo Cousillas the floor, and also share some slides about the conference. Please go ahead, Marcelo. Thank you, Carlos. We will now move on to consider some organizational aspects of the work of COP2. As you are aware, this Conference of the Parties that will be held in Buenos Aires in April is an extraordinary conference. In consequence, the main issue, the key aspect to be taken into consideration, will be specifically that which is resolved in its summons established in COP1, and which has to do with the election of the committee for the support of implementation and compliance. On the screen, you can see the provisional program, and after the procedural aspects in terms of approving the agenda, accepting the credentials of state parties, the second point is, and the single point basically is the election of the members of the committee to support the implementation and compliance of the agreement. This is provisional agenda is available in the webpage and has been shared as an LC/COP/1 document. And in order to elect the members of the committee, obviously adhering to the rules, so we will seek the consensus of all state parties, but I would like to remind you all that in accordance with the provisions of procedural rules, if we are unable to reach that consensus, we will use a simple majority of parties that are present through a secret vote. Once the Conference of the Parties has elected the 7 members of the roster of 10 candidates, and who will be the 7 members that will comprise this first committee, the chair will then during the conference appoint the 3 members whose mandate will be 6 years. You may remember that the procedures establish a mechanism to renew the members of the committee, a gradual renewal, and for this first group of members, it foresees that part of the committee members will have an extended period of membership so that we can conduct that renewal, that gradual renewal during this first committee. The result of the elections and the results of this appointment of 3 members will become a decision to be approved by the Conference of the Parties. The importance of this pre-COP is that we have enjoyed the presence of all 10 candidates in the roster, and we will also have video presentations, recorded video presentations of all these 10 candidates that will be presented during the COP meeting in April, because the candidates of the roster will not be participating face-to-face in this April meeting, but will be available if necessary, or if we need to conduct consultations, or if a state party wishes to ask anything. Those candidates will be available for that purpose. We must remind you that the conference, the COP meeting in April, will be a 100% face-to-face conference. The parties, the representatives of the public, and the other participants in the conference will all be present physically at the conference. We will, of course, have online streaming via the usual channels, but we will not. This will not involve the participation via virtual means. Having said this, I would like to offer the floor to our colleagues from Argentina, so that as a host country, they may share some logistical and organizational aspects with us. I assume that Cecilia is there. Thank you very much, Marcelo. I would like to share some information. During the next few days, not only via ECLAC, but also via other means, we'll be able to share more information with you. What is most important, and I understand that ECLAC has already sent out the invitations, and we're also reinforcing all that work. A special request for all us present here is that you can encourage your own authorities to take part, to send delegations. That is very also applicable to representatives of the public. I believe that as from the public, this is a very good opportunity to convince the countries in the region to participate. All that would be tremendously important. The dates that we have, as you well know, are the 19th to the 21st of April. The idea is that on Wednesday, 19th of April, as from 1800 hours, we will formally open the COP2, and that will be accompanied by a cultural proposal, a welcoming cultural proposal in a country that is marvelous. I say that because I am very proud of the Kirchner Cultural Center, a very beautiful building right in front of the presidential palace in downtown Buenos Aires. And the idea is to have a formal opening session there with authorities. The president will probably accompany us, and other local authorities, probably the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as well. And as I mentioned, we will have a cultural event of Argentinian folk music and with special guests, so that may become a truly adequate opening. And after that, we will have a cocktail party and prepare for the next days. The sessions on Thursday 20th and Friday 21st will be in Hotel Libertador, which is very close by. This is in downtown Santiago, Córdoba, with Maipú. And those of you that wish to stay at that hotel can stay there, but there are, of course, other hotels nearby. And what is interesting is that the hotel will be practically 100% devoted to COP, and that means that we'll be able to use all those spaces and intervene them. And we will also have space for delegations to meet civil society, and so that this may be a very fruitful space to meet and to negotiate. During those 2 days, between on the 20th and 21st, we will have a room specially devoted to civil society, managed by the public, and the idea is for them to use that for meetings, workshops, discussions, and so on, for whatever they deem necessary. And in addition, of course, to the rooms for the organization and for other activities.
We have high hopes and high expectations for this COP. It was a great experience, the one organized in Chile. So starting up this agreement is a great opportunity. I believe those of us who are part of the board of the public's elected representatives, we are driving this process. And today, with the introduction of the candidates from this roster, has been extremely interesting. We have great profiles, great candidates to that compliance and implementation committee. I believe it is of the highest level, and we will also welcome them during the COP for the effective implementation of the agreement in the countries in the region. The objective of setting up this first committee of the agreement, the idea also is to discuss financial mechanisms for the implementation, make progress in developing an action plan for the protection of environmental ombudsmen, things that were discussed in Ecuador. We believe these are absolutely necessary instruments to make environmental democracy a reality in the region. For sure, in the coming weeks, we will be providing you with more information. We hope we will be able to welcome all of you, and let's meet in Buenos Aires. Thank you, Cecilia. We'd like to thank the Undersecretary of the Environment of Argentina for her remarks, and we know that it's going to be a total success, this meeting in Buenos Aires, knowing that she is in charge of the organization directly. Now, I'd like to ask the Secretariat to discuss about the structure of the sessions and further interesting information of this second conference of the parties. Please, Carlos, if you can mention registration and side events. Yes, I will share with you my screen so you can see some of the aspects that I'd like to delve into. Well, first of all, to follow up on what the Secretary Nicolini said on the 19th, some meetings would start already. Please remember that prior to any COP, there's meetings of the heads of delegations, and registration will be open on the 18th. And there's also a meeting with the representatives of the public. So that same day, before starting this event mentioned by Ms. Nicolini, we can start already working on what's coming the next day, the formal opening with the adoption of the agenda for that would take on the morning of 20th, Thursday the 20th, and after what has been mentioned by Mr. Cosillas, we would start discussions in order to achieve that roster of 7 candidates. That will be the objective for the decision during the COP. As Cecilia said, the idea is to also use this conference of the parties as a time and a venue where we can all discuss many other aspects to make progress in other aspects that may be part of the official agenda, that besides the official agenda would require some discussion. And of course, we will have some special side events or side sessions regarding the implementation. In several countries of the region are making progress regarding implementation plans. It is the time to show that progress and to show this dynamic that will possibly be an important part of the subsequent COP. We will take the time during the meeting to hold a brief meeting of the work group on human rights ombudsman regarding environmental aspects and to look at the results of the Quito forum and the presentation of such report from that forum, and also the index regarding the action plan. And I mentioned here the decision established one annual forum for these ombudsmen, but also a group, a work group to work on an action plan for the COP meeting in 2024. So during this meeting, we'll have the chance of looking at that index and to continue working with that group. And of course, issues related by mentioned by Mrs. Nicolini regarding funding. We hope we have some representative of a compliance committee so they can report as well to all participants regarding the operation of other compliance committees. Those would be the details about the sessions. But besides those special sessions, and on the website of the conference, you'll also find the chance of attend virtual side events, and that's already open to apply to and register to these side events. In the previous couple, there were 29 side events, and there's still some room to do the same this time, and with the same rules as the previous conference. What you see on the screen is the meetings webpage. The registration is already open. More than 379 people have registered on the public segment. And just to tell you the following, first item is registration has 3 places. The first one is for the delegations. The second one is for the United Nations system and international organizations. And with that, we mean officials who come from regional integration agencies or the development banking system, but it's not for NGOs, even if they work in the international context. That is to say, it's limited to these international organizations or intergovernment organizations or from the UN system. And the third registration place is the public one. And as you know, in the Escazú public agreement, the one it's not what but the public we by public we mean everyone, either legal individuals or private individuals who are subject to national jurisdictions. So with this registration, what's important is that for you to adequately register, and when deciding how you are going to participate, the limitation is usually the number of people that can attend. If Mrs. Nicolini is going to be a broad coverage for the opening ceremony, it's going to be a large in the coming days, we will try to maximize the capacity of venues to allow for the largest number of people possible to attend. We'll start accreditation for people who come from other countries in the region, so those who are accepted can start already doing their traveling arrangements as soon as possible. And just for you to see a snapshot, this is registration for the participants. Public is those who are not government delegations or the ones who belong to the United Nations system. As to credentials for the parties, it is very important for you to receive the credentials as soon as possible so they can be checked. Hopefully, we would be expecting that before April 6th. Some delegations have already sent them, so we'd like to thank you for that. Finally, as I said, on that same webpage of the conference, of the second conference of the parties, you'll find the forms, the application forms to these side events, and this period will be open between February 23rd and March 16th. So you're all kindly invited to start applying. What's important is to remind you is that the agreement webpage, although we are going to send the information to the different delegations by mail, and but on the web page of the conference, or the second conference of the parties, we will upload all the relevant information for the negotiation, not only the agenda and the roster that is already there, but possibly we will make some progress regarding the draft decision, because that will basically depend on the 7 candidates that the delegations may appoint with the engagement of the public. We will continue to upload information, and with that, basically, I would stop here. This is the objective of not only of this board, but also Argentina as the host. We will try to maximize engagement. Remember that it's going to be some limitation regarding the number of people that can attend in the rooms of the hotel, but we'll do our best. And so the objective is to maximize engagement. And just like this meeting, it's going to be broadcasted by video streaming every single day. So you'll always be able to be up to date by checking the streaming. So I'll stop here. And of course, if there is any, yes, there's a question. For the government delegations, what's traditional is to have some space at the round table, so to speak, or square table. We'll see how it is configured, but with chairs on a second row, depending on the number of delegations, that could be more flexible, but there could be some space at the table and with second row seats, if you wish. I don't know if there are any more questions for Argentina or for the presidency. We're open. Somebody asks Natalia Gomez if you could write it in the chat, please. We would greatly appreciate if you could write it in the chat. Okay, as I said, everything will be broadcasted. We will have, we'll try to accommodate as many people as possible. The main objective of the conference is the election of the members. But since there are going to be many delegations present, we'll try to make progress in other topics that will allow us to have a better organization of the COP in 2024. Carlos de Miguel, I understand the chat is not enabled for the participants. I don't know if Natalia can
Pregunta, por favor.
Can you enable Natalia Gomez to ask a question? People in ICT, please.
Natalia, adelante.
Go ahead, Natalia.
Gracias, Carlos. Ya ahora sí tengo chat también. Natalia Gómez con el right.
Natalia Gomez, the question was about the information that you were sharing regarding the work group meeting, the ombudsman meeting. We had an agenda saying that the final report would be ready by the end of January. So on April, we'll be already working on the index. I believe information changed now, and it's not really clear what would happen. So if you could give us further information regarding that schedule and how that both the final report and the draft will be discussed. It would be very useful to have that information. Okay, Natalia. Well, of course, there are so many circumstances, but the preliminary schedule is a little bit late, but the report is ready. It's practically already translated and reviewed, so I believe very soon it will be made available to everyone. Of course, it will be circulated, it will be distributed during the session of the Conference of the Parties. I mean, the report from the first forum of human rights, environmental matters ombudsman that took place in Quito. That, given its 10 working groups, was useful to discuss the whole issue and the potential solutions for this issue in the region. We've been working on the index precisely. There's a draft version, but we hope with the work group that, as I said, that is led by Chile, Ecuador, and St. Kitts and Nevis, that prior to the meeting, the proposal of the annotated index will be available. So the idea is to continue during that meeting, to continue doing that work on the index, but for the meeting that will be available, hopefully it will be ready in the 2 languages prior to the meeting. So we will do our best to have it ready as soon as possible. And of course, in that meeting, we could discuss the next steps. In fact, preliminarily, the second meeting of the Ombudsman Forum would take place at the end of September or in October. And we're working on that already, and we would hope that during the COP, we can announce the venue and the exact date. The public and the delegations would receive the information earlier because the international agenda becomes much more complex in November to fit one of these events. Okay, if there are no more questions or additional issues, I'd like to offer the floor back to Marcelo. Marcelo.
Thank you, Carlos, and I thank the Secretariat for the organization of the second Conference of the Parties. In order to bring this pre-COP meeting to a close, I would like to invite the representative of the public to share some brief closing remarks. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to talk about the enthusiasm and the happiness involved in so many people involved in the Escazú Agreement, and this is clear evidence of that. And in that sense, we feel that what is fundamental is the massive participation of the public in the next COP, and thus we summon the different countries to facilitate and support that, so that may happen. We need your support so that the participation be massive, and also to supporting the Escazú Agreement implies, among other things, as mentioned beforehand, that the top authorities of each country be present in Buenos Aires on the 19th through the 21st of April. And we would like to especially emphasize that, benefiting from this, and also benefiting from the presentations delivered by the 10 candidates. We know that it is important for the different countries to take into consideration the comments that we can share as from the public within the next few days, because that will make the process much more solid, participative, and democratic. And benefiting from what has been just said, as from the Secretariat, we would like to highlight the importance of the plan of action for defenders. And that is why we have been working hard on that. And thus, we are very happy that we will have a space for that during the COP. And hopefully, when we conclude the COP2 meeting, we will have made a great progress in the sense we need concrete results, and thus we want to emphasize the importance of this possibility. And we would also like to reiterate and insist on the fact that you delegates, country delegates, provide us with your support and your willingness to facilitate the participation of the public during the COP2 meeting. We will continue to insist during the next few weeks on this. And of course, you can count on us as representatives of the public to work hard during these next few weeks. And finally, and as mentioned beforehand, with open arms. So we will wait for you. We will welcome you here in Buenos Aires with a lot of mate, with the World Cup in our hands, and wanting to work so that during the next COP meeting, we will have made tremendous progress to continue to transform our region. Warm greetings to you all. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. It'll be a pleasure to share our work with all of you in Buenos Aires. I would like to conclude this session not making more reflections, but rather thanking everyone for your participation during this pre-COP meeting. I believe that it has truly been very fruitful and very important, everything that we have discussed. And I would like to especially thank the participation of the 10 candidates of the roster who have share their time with us so that we can have more elements at hand before making this decision. I believe all of you are worthy of forming part of this first committee for the implementation and compliance of the agreement. I believe that state parties have elements to prepare the April conference. You have elements in order to design or produce your own list, a list that in this case will be useful so that all of you may introduce yourselves to this consensus, contribute your vision so that we can strike the necessary consensus, the consensus that is fundamental, so that decisions may be very solid and receive the support of all state parties. I would also like to thank Argentina for their willingness to act as host of the second COP meeting, and representatives of the public for their support, which is also always very active. They are truly the force that pushes us forward so that we can implement this agreement in the most efficient fashion possible. And of course, I would like to thank the Secretariat, the interpreters, the technicians that have made this meeting possible. Without them, our connections would not be sufficiently useful. I invite you all to accompany us in the second COP2 meeting between the 19th and 21st of April in Buenos Aires. I hope you can all be physically present with us, and if not, to be there via web streaming. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Goodbye, everyone.
Chao, chao a todos.